Hello, and welcome to this week's look at action and stunts on film and television. Welcome to Friday, everybody. You've done it again. You've gone through an entire week and you have landed on the best day of the week. Friday it is, and Friday means that it is our time to go and explore the world of action. This week we are back in the world of Bond because it is top 10 time. We've had a couple of these already, and this week my guest is Sam Rogers. From up north. He's from Manchester, and is a young Bond fan, been involved in the Bond community for quite some time, done some bits and pieces with Really 007, and has sat in on a number of interviews with eminent individuals over the years. He has plenty to say about Bond, lots of exciting bits and pieces. So let's go through his top 10, and it goes like this. So, Sam, thanks for doing this, man. Much appreciated. And you have your top 10, and we will start in reverse order. So let's go with the one that is your first. Is it an action sequence? Is it a stunt? What movie is it from? Tell me.
Okay, so I will preempt this by saying this list is so interchangeable. I mean, the scaling of where things go could change. There's so many fantastic action sequences, but I've gone with a really solid kind of number 10 here, which is Bond versus Oddjob in Goldfinger.
Okay.
Whilst, I think the From Russia with Love fight with Red Grant is amazing, of course it is. What I love about this is that you were in this grandiose Fort Knox set,
Uh-huh.
which is one thing. I love the backdrop for this. You also have all the action that's happening outside, with Goldfinger's goons and the soldiers. And you have the intense action inside between Bond trying to get the handcuff off to then fighting Oddjob, all the while knowing that there's a ticking bomb there. So I love all the action that's going on inside, and I love that Harold Sakata is just so is just I love what he brings to the screen. I love how easy it is for him to throw Bond, across the floor. Connery looks really disheveled, yet he keeps going, he keeps trying, and luckily we have this amazing stunt at the end where uh, Bond uses Oddjob's hat to conduct electricity and kill Oddjob, which is wonderful. So yeah, that's my number 10 scene.
Um, yeah, it's an interesting fight. It's a again a very typical Bob Simmons fight because as you may well know, with a lot of those Bob Simmons fights that you see in pictures, there's furniture, there's
Mm.
props, there's stuff being used. The idea that there's the hat being thrown from place to place. Bond is obviously attached to this thing that he's trying to get off his arm, and leading up to that, he's got this stick in his hand, and they wrestled to the wall and to the other bits and pieces. The other thing that I find fascinating, when for many years people go, well, it's Bob Simmons doubling Connery, and it isn't. It's Peter Perkins. Peter Perkins, of course, was the coordinator on From Russia with Love, and has a fair mass of hair and is much taller than Bob Simmons as well. So, but I mean, Harold Sakata doing the whole 9 yards. But a great deal of stuff going on, some great high falls as well. Alf Joint and George Leach doing some great high falls off the balconies there, and one directly into camera that Bob
Mm.
Simmons did himself. So there's some terrific stuff, and it's an interesting one to add in. It is, I will say, it is the first time that's been mentioned. So nobody's mentioned that yet, but it does deserve its place there because as far as those big sets were concerned, that's probably the first time we saw that big set and the big fight at the end, everybody storming in and the gunfight, and then Goldfinger trying to leave. So, yeah, I think that's a worthy choice to start off with. Where do we go from there? Then you start with Goldfinger. Where do you go?
Well, I've tried to be really kind of even with the bonds. So there's one from each at least. I've gone to the Living Daylights next, and I've gone with the attack in Afghanistan. So really at the army base. And with this, really enjoy the scale of what's going on. You really feel like you're there.
Yeah.
So I think one of the key things that I love about this is Kara being proactive. And if anyone knows me, I'm not exactly the biggest Kara fan. However, I feel like in this scene in particular, I really like that she's using initiative. She's going to get to Bond however she can, whether that's on horse, whether that's by jeep. She's being shot at by Necros and Koskov, and she makes her way, along to this massive cargo plane. That's going on whilst the Colonel is being exploded by a grenade, which I get a laugh at. Maybe I don't know if it's worth a laugh, but I always have a good time just seeing him because he's an awful person. And then the fact that Koskov manages to survive that massive explosion with the plane as it comes down, he has a few cuts, he's a bit bloodied, and that's it. It's sort of like he should have died there. And then Bond and Kara and secretly Necros fly away. But yeah, that whole sequence is amazing. I love the amount of explosions that are used right
It's
now.
a massive sequence, isn't it? I mean, and not a huge space. The location they filmed at there in Ouarzazate, but nevertheless, the the beauty that John Glenn brings to it from a directorial perspective, and also from a first and second unit idea, is that you have lots of stuff going on in the background, and then you've got lots of stuff happening in the foreground, and there may not be that many people there, but the idea of having these images, jeeps running about, people running about. I'm very conscious of the fact when the Hercules, does start to move, and again they do it in Tomorrow Never Dies as well, but the afterburners or the engines power up, and of course everybody starts rolling down the tarmac, and they're doing it all over the place, but there are some lovely scenes in that. One thing with Kara though, which has always struck me, is that you're quite up until that point, she's remarkably resourceful. She knows she has to get where's James? I need to get from here to there, but she gets on the horse and she starts to ride, and she sees what's going on, and there's chaos happening, and the Mujahideen have arrived, and they're using excavators, and they're doing all that sort of stuff, and there's gunfire going off, and then she rides, and there's an explosion, and she falls off the horse, and then she says, well, right, I'll just get in the jeep, and she gets in the jeep and she goes after the plane, and the guy jumps up in the front. She's giving him the windscreen wiper treatment and chucks him off. It's only when she gets on the plane that she seems to lose all necessary resources.
The adrenaline's gone. It's like, oh no,
adrenaline's gone. She's peaked too soon.
Yeah.
Is what's happened. But and again, the whole idea of being able to drive the vehicle into the back of the Hercules, which of course you cannot do because the Hercules can't taxi with its tailgate down. So again, ingenuity from John Glenn and the special effects boys going, we'll use a horse box. Oh, all right, that's an idea. But dressed it to the point where that little up the ramp is the horse box, and the inside is the inside set. It was absolutely brilliant, really, really clever stuff. And Paul Weston throwing the kitchen sink at all the action and bits and pieces elsewhere. There's a couple of really huge explosions out there. The oil tanker goes up, and there's a ripple effect, and then there's these guys running away from it, and it's just huge, absolutely magnificent explosions.
Yeah, and I think the wonderful thing, I mean, and you can say this about the majority of Bond stunts, is the practical effects that are used. And I think just the ingenuity to think, well, actually, we can get around this by doing this. And I think once you notice that the back of the plane is actually a horse box, it's very clear as day once you could just compare and you go, oh, well, there's a lot smaller than the actual ramp. However, I don't think anything like that takes enough out of the experience to get you going, oh, well, that's just taken me out of it, because it's done so well. And a lot of that just comes to editing and pacing, that you wouldn't.
No, I see that, but I've never really that phrase being. I hear that a lot. You listen to podcasts and people go, "Well, it kind of took me out of the movie for a moment." Nothing. At the time when I was a kid, when I saw it for the first time in the cinema, I was convinced, and that's all you need. You just need that moment. driving in, right? She's driven up the back of the plane and landed and driven and got into that. That's it. And even now, many years later, when you find out how it's done, it doesn't really take anything away from it. They've just created something because, from a practical point of view, that's how you can get that Jeep into that vehicle. But you can't drive into that vehicle, so we'll do something else. But nevertheless, but I think that the practicality of the whole thing works very well. But again, from a first-time viewing point of view, I thought it was magnificent. There's a great many moments in that picture which are magnificent. Many of them may crop up during the course of this. We don't know, but that particularly, again, we looked at the Goldfinger thing. That kind of started the ball rolling. This is, what was it? 15 movies down the line. 15 movies down the line, and they've got to that stage where they've now thought, right, well, a huge battle and planes and this and explosions and that. It's magnificent. It really is. So yeah, from a size point of view, it just keeps getting bigger and better and better. When did you see Living Daylights first? Was it on DVD maybe?
It would have been on video. It would have been when I was about 10 or 11.
Right.
I think when I was about 11, I saw it for the first time. Yeah. So I think it was a good age to watch it, but at the same time, that was back then. I wasn't a massive Dalton fan because I had never seen him before until that point. Whereas I'd seen Connery, I'd seen Moore, I'd seen Brosnan. So I was very much kind of in those camps of what Bond is. So the Dalton era took a while to kind of for me to become a fan of, although like Living Daylights is still kind of relatively low in my ranking. License to Kill is way up there, is in my top 10. And I think, sometimes it just takes a bit of time because you're so used to Bond being one type of thing.
Yes, of course.
And of course, Connery, Moore, and Brosnan have their differences, but I would put them more in the same frame rather than Dalton, who is very much, him and Craig are in their own thing, and then Lazenby's kind of, I would say, in the middle a little bit. So yeah, it did take a while, but I mean, I really appreciate, especially John Glenn's films. I think it took a while for me to warm up to most of those films, apart from A View to a Kill, because I love Camp Cheese, and A View to a Kill's always been a favorite. But yeah, I really appreciate kind of the development of John Glenn and the way these films go. It's a shame it didn't go further, but I think there's a lot of fans for him out there.
Certainly. I mean, he's received a Lifetime Achievement Award very recently from the new GB fan club, and rightly so. But it's a shame that it's taken that long to get some serious recognition for the type of work. I mean, all of the movies that he created throughout the 80s were undoubtedly very key to the way that ultimately the Brosnan movies were made, and subsequently there's a resurgence, of course, now for Dalton after Craig has gone. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if even though it's two movies, they as you said yourself, one's fairly low down for you, one's right up there, so they're pendulum swings on this occasion. But again, a sensational sequence, and earns its spot there. How do you follow the Living Daylights and that huge battle sequence?
Well, we stick with John Glenn here. And we go to his first. I've picked A Drive in the Country from For Your Eyes Only, because it was a toss-up between that and the train sequence from Octopussy, and for whatever reason, I get so much joy from the Citroen 2CV and it just being bashed about. I think the entire sequence is so audacious. From everything, just the choice of car, the music, everything just, to me, works in when it really shouldn't. And I just love how kind of they're not afraid to just go with it and just go, this is crazy. This should not work. This car is getting beaten up. Yeah. It's going to be turned upside down. It's going to roll down a hill. It's going to jump over another car. It's going to do a handbrake traversal, it feels like, in the middle of the road when those Peugeots go past. But it's fun. It's such fun. And I think being in that location as well, I don't think there's been many kind of chase sequences in a location like that, especially with kind of the spiraling roads, the winding roads down. I love what it's trying to do, and I love that the audience is faked out by the Lotus that goes, and yet we have this
Yeah,
equally as impressive sequence. I mean, in some ways I prefer the Spy Who Loved Me chase with the Lotus and with
against
obviously
the
the
Ford
gadgets that are
Cortina.
done. Yeah, but this to me works equally as good, if not better. Um, so yeah, that
I
shows them there.
absolutely love this sequence. I love this movie. It was the
Mhm.
first movie I ever saw, the first Bond I saw at the cinema, and it absolutely blew me away completely. Uh, and there are moments in that. Again, John Glenn, you have to tip your hat to. He was the one who was responsible for getting Reme Julien on the picture because he realized that there was a storyboarded chase, and he realized that he had seen uh, from European cinema that there were a bunch of guys who could do this. And obviously they were French, they were just, at the time, they were the most extraordinary team. Of course, they worked on many pictures over the years, most memorably possibly The Italian Job. As people, Michael Caine himself said that, the cars were the stars of that picture. The whole idea of the heist in Italy was merely an excuse to have an audacious car chase. And it worked. And who do you get to do that? Well, you get Reme Julien, who was unbelievable. And the 2CV, effectively I'm surprised it's not on the French flag. And it is the most iconic vehicle in yellow, but a bugger to drive. I mean, really complicated because everything is on the dash. It's stick shift to a point, but the way that we have gears, stick shift in our car, down to the left and placed in the floor. On a 2CV, it's based on the dash, and you're going forwards and backwards, and the emergency brake is there too. So that J turn that he's done, the 180, reverse 180, is incredibly complicated. There's a whole bunch of things have to happen, have to trigger at the right time. He's got to hit the brake, swing the car, change gear en route round, so that when the car does then drop the brake, he can just drive away. And you look at you can see that he's had a couple of goes. You can see the marks on the floor. And again, the idea of John Glenn saying, we need this car to be battered up but still keep going. He says, no problem. And they just created this remarkable roll cage that prevented the whole car from just concertinaing in, because that's what it would have done.
Yeah.
A remarkable, filmed in Greece, of course, pretending to be Spain.
Mhm.
And when I went to Corfu the first time, which I think was 86, so with my family, in 86, and we got to firstly go to Mouse Island, which is where the little church, the little chapel is on the end there, before he takes Melina off to the market, or she takes him. And then that road on the way round, you can see the bends, and all you hear is Bill Conti's magnificent score. I love it. I really do. There's so many things to, and as I said, and I probably said this before on this podcast and many others. If I have, I apologize, but I'm going to say it again. I don't care. On the lucky occasions when I've been able to speak to John Glenn, one of which was many moons ago in Stockholm, we had an event there, and I managed to sit down with him. I said, the reason that I like For Your Eyes Only is that you can take Bond out of it and replace him with any character, and the movie still works. It still works as a good old-fashioned thriller, because we've had the whole space thing beforehand, and it all got to be exciting. And then that's their way of going, right, let's just calm down and let's go back to good old-fashioned thriller. It's a bloody marvelous movie. It really is. I think it's terrific. And I think there's so many great moments in it. But that 2CV, I remember it winning an award. It won an editing award. It might have been at a very early BAFTA thing in the mid 80s, early 80s, maybe 82, because the movie came out in 81. So it was the following year. Action editing, I think, was a category, and it won something for that. But the amount of work that Reme Julien went through to create and to keep using the car over and over again, particularly with the use of cardboard boxes to catch the car. That had never been done before, you know. From a British perspective, if you wreck the car, well, you may have another one, or we'll panel beat this one out so that it looks like we can probably get away with it and have another go if it's roadworthy. But although they had quite a few 2CVs, the jump car, particularly, that goes from one side of the road to the other with the car traveling underneath, had to land in boxes the other side to maintain its shape and poise. So if they wanted to do it again, they could do it again. That was really that hadn't been done before, you know. So that revolutionary type of looking from an engineering point of view to go, well, there's nothing wrong with that car. We just do it again, and he continues to do it over and over in all of his films. But the first introduction there of Reme Juliet, and revolutionary to cinema and to car chases, quite clearly, because not only in Bond but in all other movies that he worked in. So yes, very pleased that For Your Eyes Only and that particular chase has made it. It's that line, isn't it? I hope you have a car, and he throws the keys to go. Yeah, it's this way, and off they go. Bob Simmons is the guy who breaks the window and it explodes.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been so easy to pick the ski chase as well, because I mean that's I mean that the chases in that film are special for sure. And I think definitely at this time they're not afraid to be. I mean, I don't think they ever really were, but I feel like especially during this time, how bombastic they can be and where they can take it, because they've already done everything before.
Yes,
you know, so you've really got to kind of either perfect that or do it a bit differently, make it more unique. So let's have a ski chase where they chase by motorbikes. Well, let's have this car chase, but actually get rid of the supercar and get this. So I appreciate what they're trying to do to make it not only memorable, but make it something that would still work within the universe of Bond anyway.
Also, the versatility of that as well, for having Reme Juliet as the guy responsible for the car chase in Greece. He is also the guy responsible for the motorbikes chasing the skis. His son riding one, his other son riding the other, and a couple of other stunt guys as well. So very, very impressive to have the same person do the entire thing. Nowadays, there's driving coordinators, there's fight arrangers, there's this, there's that. People are pigeonholed into different areas, whereas he was one of those guys that was still doing it all back then, you know?
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I didn't know that he did the motorbikes. I only knew about the cars. So it's interesting to have that versatility in someone that you can trust them to do not just one type of thing, but a bunch of different things. And I think in film, especially, you know, back then and older, there was more of that reliance on someone being able to be versatile. Whereas now I think there is more of a blend of things where it's like you've got to have your strength in this, and this is what you've got to do. And maybe in certain productions, you know, you do need someone to be a bit more versatile. But I think in the grand scheme of things, there is a set role for each person. You're going to do the stunts on this sequence. You're going to do the stunts on this sequence. You're going to coordinate this, which I think is great to get more people involved for sure. But obviously, you know, with the Bond family back then, which was very strong, you know, you keep everyone together, keep everyone on side. And it would have been great for Remy to just like tell his sons, right, you do this how I tell you to do it, and he's playing more like, okay. So
also never has a stuntman looked as good in a long Melina Havelock wig. There's a lovely photograph of him adorned in the wig for the take the low road moment where he rolls the car over. So there's always having the and again, people go, well, why wasn't there a woman doing it? Well, it's 1981. There weren't any. I mean, there were, but they were obviously few and far between and very small numbers. So they were particularly British stunt performers, where a great many of them are here. They're wanted over here, they're wanted over there, they're wanted doing this, they're wanted doing that, and they can't be in as many places at once. So consequently, Remy said, give me the wig, I'll do it. You know, just to get through it, you know.
And I guess back then it's more go with what you know. I think there was less of a let's try and do this behind the scenes. Let's try and do this different. Let's try and bring these types of different types of people in. Obviously, I believe totally that, you know, that different types of people should get those opportunities. But I think from a retrospective point of view, it's understandable. You know, you can't change the past. That's just how it was done. Luckily, there's much more opportunities now for women to get involved in stunt work and in action sequences. You know, I think of because Gladiators has just come back, and so, you know, like Eunice Huffart came from
Yes, that's
Gladiators,
where
and
she
you
came
know,
from. Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
we know doubled for Xenia and has doubled for Angelina Jolie as well, and obviously has a great, you know, portfolio there. So I mean, obviously that's just one person, but you know, it's just breaking barriers, opening doors, and really setting new trends, which is fantastic.
Little did she think when she won Gladiators that she would one day be the stunt coordinator on a Star Wars movie. I mean,
I
it's
mean,
that's pretty impressive, isn't it?
that is the dream: win Gladiators and be part of Star Wars. It's just and James Bond, of course.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
I mean,
it's
that is winning in life.
winning in life, absolutely, and still very stuck in her roots as far as football is concerned. She's all over Twitter with football. You must try and follow her on there. Right, so driving the country at number 8. How on earth do we possibly follow the wonderful 2CV chase? What with?
We go with a lovely sequence from a film that everyone loves, No Time to Die. We have the Cuba fights,
Oh,
because I get a lot of joy from it, and I just appreciate its fluidity. I think it goes by so quickly, and I mean that in the nicest sense possible. I think everything with it works, and everyone has a role to play in it. Um, so Bond, Paloma, and Nomi, everyone has their own kind of unique moments to shine. Um, and yeah, I just love how it's done. I think there's some fantastic choreography. You know, I liked seeing some of the behind the scenes with Ana de Armas practicing,
mm,
and just knowing that, you know, just some of the lines in it as well. I love, you know, Lashana Lynch when she's like, "I'm taking you back to mother, darling," and that Bond and Paloma having a quick drink in
a
between and then
shot.
going right back to it. And I think
Yeah.
Craig, you know, I know he has detractors. However, I feel like in this he plays Bond so coolly. He can just go and shoot anyone, and it feels like he is absolutely at the top of his game there. Um, so yeah, I love the entire sequence. I think even though it was all shot, you know, on a stage, it feels like you're in Cuba, and I just get a massive sense of satisfaction that this feels like Bond.
Mm.
And it's probably the my favorite scene of the film, because it feels so classic yet done in a modern way and filmed in a modern way, and the choreography. Yeah, I really appreciate having it.
Anybody who knows me knows that this is absolutely my least favorite movie
Yeah.
of the whole. However, and you really have you've put it beautifully there. That moment in Cuba for me is absolutely the best moment in the picture. I don't take anything away from the pre-title sequence, but or maybe the underwater sequence to a point, but I would say that this is the most perfect moment in the entire picture for me. And I think you've also struck on a point there that Daniel Craig is as good as Bond in this sequence as he probably ever has been in those previous pictures. Just the rapport between him and Ana de Armas is magnificent. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that it was the last setup, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
that was the
yeah.
last thing that he filmed before he said goodbye. But the amount of work that's gone into it, the amount of work that Ana de Armas has put into it, particularly, DC has doubled a lot in the sequence, whereas she isn't to a point. She's done a huge amount of work for setups and going back to the old days of having the actors do it and then have the stunt doubles do it and then have pickup shots so that we want to see more of her against the stunt guys. Now, all the people that she's fighting are stunt guys, actors in the roles that they're playing. But as you've seen yourself, you saw that stuff that she had on Instagram, I think it was, of her in the fight training and doing the kicks up to head height, regardless of how tall the people were. And she makes, firing those machine guns, looking as amazing as she does, makes it the most elegant thing you've ever seen in your entire life. I think she's one of the best things in the movie, without question. And this sequence really does, on a number of levels, tick every single box. And for me, I just wish the rest of the movie was as good as that. That really does encapsulate everything. But it's a sensational, and it's a set. And you also said that you thought it was Cuba. To find out that it's on the backlot at Pinewood is really, oh wow, what a job they've done there, and it just looks really, really impressive. So yeah, definitely that would certainly be. How many times did you see No Time to Die, Boy?
I saw it at the cinema 3 times.
Right.
And I've seen it, I think, only once since, maybe twice. It's not one that I would probably easily put on.
No.
But definitely for the action sequences alone, I mean, I really enjoy the pre-title sequence as well. I think that it's so interesting the way it's done, and it's quite extended because it's like there's a pre-title sequence,
Yes,
and then
yes,
the
exactly.
actual one. And then also just later on in the film, the action that's going on in the woods. I think all that, the visuals. I think what I appreciate a lot about No Time to Die is the cinematography. I think it all looks to me very interesting, especially when coming off the back of, Quantum, Skyfall, and Spectre, which for me, I think the color's not there. At least in some cases with Skyfall, there's some very interesting uses of color, but I think in Spectre and Quantum especially, it's very drawn out, and for me, I love a colorful Bond. I probably prefer a camp Bond, one that's a bit more lighter than dark. Yeah, but no, overall, I think it just looks beautiful. It sounds beautiful. Just everything works here, and I think no matter what, if you're gonna recommend No Time to Die to someone, you'd be like, right, there's this sequence. No matter what, there's this sequence, and you need to get to this alone because it's such an enjoyable few minutes.
If somebody were to say, who is this James Bond character that you keep talking about? You could show them the Cuba scene. I think you could show it to them and then go, oh, this guy. Oh, yeah, I like this guy. Yeah, because that it does everything in that sequence. He has he's very good with a weapon. He's in charge. He's also working with somebody who, even at first glance, although appears new on the job, really knows her shit. She's absolutely on the ball. And then you've got the guy who, he's quite happy to have a drink during the course of the lot of it. And hey, salut, and boom, let's have that. And then do the whole thing and then still finish the job and then say to her afterwards, do you know something? You were excellent. Well done.
Yeah.
And then them go off and not have that moment where they thought they were going to have that moment at the start of the thing where, she said you should put this on, and he starts to undress and oh, I see what you mean, right? All that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think it's a very, very, it could even have been directed by somebody else,
Yeah.
Isn't it strange? You look at the rest of the picture and I compare it to that moment, you go, that could be a John Glenn moment.
No, I do agree. I don't think it's so vastly different from the rest. However, to me, there's a reason why it stands out. And I think it's, a bunch of the elements, if for some reason this seem to work a lot more than others. Not to say that, for me, I enjoy the film quite a lot. So there's a lot that I get from it. However, there's a reason why I focus on this scene and this sequence of events. Everything went as soon as Bond reaches Cuba to when he exits. It's just you take into almost another Bond film for a little bit, for a few minutes, where you don't need too much context. He's just trying to get this guy, and that's it. And he's Bond, and he does it. And even though Lashana Lynch is so frustrated by it, she can still hold her own and then escape so quickly, like a spy. She gets the lights turned out, and then she's gone. And I kind of love that as well. So yeah, everything works. Everything works.
Excellent choice. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Next one will be your fifth choice. What do you have after the Cuba fight?
We're going way back, and we're going to go to You Only Live Twice,
Oh,
and I'm doing the Little Nelly fight.
oh,
Um, and I think one of the reasons why I chose this was because I feel like there's nothing quite like this. And even though we have some other aircraft sequences and stuff, there's nothing quite like this where, you know, there's attacking aircraft against another attacking aircraft. Usually
mm,
it's about just trying to fly away or something else. This is very much, you think, well, maybe Spectre believes that their people in their helicopters are going to get this one very tiny autogyro, and then Bond just flips it and gets them all out with with the Bond theme blaring in the background. I think it's such kind of if this was Connery's last film, it would have been a really nice, like, huzzah, he's still got it. He's still got the absolute style to take everyone out, barely break a sweat, um, in this gorgeous location. I know, but this was filmed in Spain, was it?
certain sections of it were, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
And yeah, yeah. So, and I love the mix of kind of obviously the practical helicopters and also the bits of model work that are in there,
mm.
which again are obvious once you see them, but especially at that time, that was what you were going to get, and it works for what it's needed to. So yeah, for me, this is more just it's a different type of sequence, not one that you would usually see. And I'm glad that we don't usually see something like this because it makes the sequence more special. Um, yeah.
We've already touched on a point here, which I think is which is happening. Uh, there's a trait happening in For Your Eyes Only. You have the two CV and is being chased by the Peugeots, and Bond
Mhm.
says we're being out horsepowered. Now you look at Little Nelly, and Little Nelly, the whole concept of her is that she's a little tiny, little helicopter, and she's being pursued by two very big helicopters, much more powerful than her, and yet because of, in this instance, the little gadgets that she has there, and the way that Ken Wallace is able to throw the thing about, and the reaction times of this particular gyrocopter may be slightly faster than the reaction times of some of the choppers that are chasing,
Mm.
then you have that cat and mouse thing. It's Tom and Jerry all over again. So yes, I think it's as chase sequences go, we don't get too many of them. I think the next one that really hits the mark would be Quantum of Solace, wouldn't it?
Mm.
From that sort of plane to plane cat and mouse type thing. You wouldn't have you wouldn't have met Ken Wallace. It was a really really nice guy. He was at 1990 was the Bond convention at Pinewood Studios, and this was the first time that they'd had all of the props in one place at one time. And so there was the miniature Hercules from Living Daylights, and all of the cars, and all of the just the most remarkable collection of stuff. And Ken Wallace was there with Little Nelly, and to just talk to him about doing it, and seeing very small space. I mean, it looks like a very small little craft when you compare it to a full-size helicopter, but when you're standing next to it, it looks like quite large. But when you see
Mm.
the little area that he has to sit in, and the controls and everything else, and you go, well, that's not really and there's no roof on this thing, so God forbid you should crash in the damn thing. And which he did a number of years later. I seem to remember at an air show, he came down awful steep to maybe try and do a low fly by the crowd that had gathered at this particular air show, and came in just a touch too steep, and with an additional gust of wind shoving him to one side, and a propeller hit the ground. He did this huge, great cartwheel. I mean, was strapped in, but the guy was over 70, so the last thing he wanted was this poor old bugger to be catapulted out from the thing. But he was
Oh.
cuts and grazes and bruises and bits and pieces, but lived to fly another day. So those elements are always in place. And of course, he did all of that flying and all of that low level flying, and coordinated with the pilots to go, well, we need to see all of you in shot at the same time. I think Johnny Jordan was one of the cameramen on that, and he wants to say, "Look, I need to see all three helicopters in the same shot, you in the middle and the two either side, and you've got to position yourself in a very special way to get all of that and be safe." You know, this is maybe before the time of being able to just adjust the lens slightly to give the impression that that's much closer than it really is. Later on, they started doing foreground miniatures and bits and pieces to cut the gap, but maybe you weren't able to do that at 11,000 feet, and so you had to judge it in a certain way. Maybe later on down the line, and in the other Bonds, they managed to get a camera perspective on it, but very serious stuff. But yeah, as far as car chases in the sky go, and it is that sort of cat and mouse thing. It's absolutely spot on, and it's a very good, it's as you say, the Bond theme powering away in the background, and the machine gun fire, and it's the same machine gun fire, though. That's the problem. I'd like to a different. It's the same ricochets. It's the same ricochets from Goldfinger. I seem to remember. I always hear that. Where the old woman comes out from the hut, and starts firing. It's that machine gun sound, that just rattling away the whole time. But
well, there's certain effects that you just hear in either the same films in the franchise or to completely different films from other things. It's like I've heard that sound in this, and you definitely feel like with the Bond films. But I think. Yeah, just with, I saw, I don't know, the Little Nelly that was outside the BFI during the 60th anniversary. And I thought, the first time seeing something like that in person, and I thought it was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
But the sequence itself, the shots, the use of, shadows at the beginning, and managed to see all the helicopters in a long shot, all flying in tandem.
Yeah.
It's just things like that that really, especially when for a lot of people watching it as a child for the first time, you get a sense of scope and scale. And I think the other thing, and I'll mention this and a couple of other things coming up, is that it's all about where this sequence comes from. It comes from one which all establishes the location. You've got the gorgeous 007 music playing, which is one of the best pieces of music that's been created for Bond. And you have this whole lead up, this kind of triumphant, Little Nelly works, and we're going to go out and figure out this mission. Suddenly this happens. You go, oh no. But then Bond can do it. The theme comes on. He turns around. He uses all these gadgets, and he's just he says his quips, and then he flies away. And it's like, do you know what? That's all I needed. I didn't need anything else. So
sometimes it doesn't take much. It just takes a little something. It had become a slight trait because obviously with Thunderball, Q had come out to the location to brief Bond, and he's out again in this one to brief Bond, and talking about Little Nelly while she's being clunk, 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 put together, in that sort of stop shots that they're doing, which is rather nice. But I think I like the Little Nelly sequence a lot, and I'm a fan of You Only Live Twice. It gets a bit of a bad rap in certain places, but I like it.
That's crazy to me.
I don't care how fat Sean Connery is in this movie or how unimpressed he is by the whole thing. I still think he does the job. I think.
If Sean Connery is fat and You Only Live Twice, then there's no hope for anyone, because that is not someone who's fat. It's not.
I will have nothing said against Diamonds Are Forever. It's absolutely one of my favorite movies. I love it.
I couldn't tell with it being in the background, John.
Oh, pride of place. Right, so your top 5 so far. We started with Bond versus Oddjob from Goldfinger. The Afghan freedom fight from The Living Daylights was at 9. Drive in the Country from For Your Eyes Only at number 8. The Cuba fight from No Time to Die at 7. And at number 6 was Little Nelly, the chase sequence there between her and the helicopters from You Only Live Twice. 5 to go. What's in at your number 5?
We're going to go to Brosnan. We're going to go to GoldenEye. And I know Chris Eels did the dam jump. I'm choosing to do the shootout and the escape from the Archangel location where we go off the runway and he's chasing the plane.
Yep.
Obviously the whole lead up with the shootout with Ben Alec Trevelyan being shot is really exciting. We get the action going again. Bond goes out. We've got this gorgeous snow out there with Brosnan's black outfit. And he's trying to get to this plane. He gets to the plane. He gets attacked. He then can't get to it. It keeps going. The pilot's out of it. This plane's still going. And then he manages to get the motorbike go down. Orumov is just looking so gleefully like, oh, do you know what? He's never going to make that. You know that this is a done deal. And then you see that absolutely stunning shot of the plane going over and then the motorbike going over, and then Bond just diving for it. And of course, we see the switch into the blue or green screen, whatever it is, and that is what it is. But again, it to me doesn't break the flow. The tension is so high. We know Bond's gonna do it, but it is like, can he pull this plane up? And then he does. Then you get that gorgeous model explosion at the end, leading
Yes.
to the title sequence. I just think everything is just. I mean, Martin Campbell does an amazing job with the whole pre-title from the Jam Jump, of course, as well. But the fact that it ends like this, where even though another agent has just died, it's like, do you know what? Round of applause, well done. You know, you've brought Bond into the 90s in a spectacular way.
I saw it 12 times at the cinema, GoldenEye, when it came out. It's still the one I've seen the most. Probably because there'd been such a huge hiatus between License to Kill and this. And the whole pre-title sequence is just magnificent. But that last section that you're referring to gets unbelievable amounts of flack. And, you know, the stunt coordinator for the flying sequence and the motorbike jump is BJ Worth. So he was responsible for finding Zoot Malnouy, Jacques Zoot Malnouy, who's the guy on the bike who rides off the end of the cliff, right? And does the first part of the free fall. So he's got to chase the plane. He's got to be right after it. It is critical that he arrives at the right moment out of shot, because that camera can only go to there. It's not going to do an awful lot more. It's not going to follow him all the way down. It's got a certain amount of restricted movement to get to there, because that's the point where they're going to then cut. And this is the point where people go, oh, no, you can see the switch. Well, there's moments leading up to the switch. So he chases the plane off the cliff. Then BJ Worth did 8 or 9 independent jumps to get in the slipstream of the diving plane, right? And there are moments there which are confused as back projection or something of that nature, giving the impression that it's a studio shot, and it's not. The moment where it's Bond and it's the plane, there is a moment there where that's BJ and that's actually the plane. Then it cuts to the inside and Pierce arrives at the side of the plane. Well, that's very clearly a back projection or a rolling stock shot or something of that nature. But the point leading up to that is incredibly complicated, and they had a 2-week period to get it done, you know. So even though it's over in the blink of an eye, and a lot of people go, oh, it's just, if they just hadn't had that back plate going, you go, well, BJ Worth actually physically dived out of a plane and his plan was to actually touch the back of the plane. That was the idea, in free fall, which I think he's done before on a couple of other bits and pieces. But to get as close as he possibly can to then break away and then pull his chute. So you've got there's a huge amount of physics going on where he can be in a certain place. If he wanders over right behind that plane, he suddenly gets himself in a really tricky situation, because if he pulls his chute at that point, there's the downdraft from the plane and then the immediate uplift from his chute, and that could go anywhere. So he has to work in at the last detail. So it's a fascinating blink and you'll miss it few moments. And when he does finally get into the plane and it just goes down out of shot, you hear that as it comes back over again. The hairs on the back of my neck still stick up now. I'm thinking about it. I'm getting excited. And then when you hear the bum, 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 just underneath as the plane's flying over the top, just the first opening bars of Tina's song, very good. I mean, it really, the whole thing itself, you could just box that and put a big bow on top of it and go, there you go. That's what you've been missing for the last few years. And it really does do everything, doesn't it? I was massively impressed with it. And every time, I said 12 occasions when I saw it at the cinema, never lost it for a moment. Always got me in exactly the same place. That's the mark of a good sequence, if it just happens over and over again, right?
Yeah, and when I first this was the first Brosnan film that I saw because I think for whatever reason they were playing it at the cinema when I was about 20 or 19, I can't remember.
Okay.
But I was like, yes, it's GoldenEye. I can't wait to see this. And obviously the dam jump and this moment, it was just instant goosebumps. Like it's something that I've seen many, many times before, but to
Yeah.
see it at the cinema, to hear those sounds in this massive theater, in this screen, and to see it happening, it just, no matter what, it's one of those that will stay with you. And I think any good scene is going to do that. Not every scene can, but they needed this sequence to work. And I think you see the intricacies because there's so much work from completely different, departments and
Yeah.
people to pull all of this together. And you can see it. So I mean, it is another case of, for some people it takes them out of the film. I think it'd be very rare for, you to be taken out of the film. I think something would have to be incredibly bad. But this is like at the time, cutting edge, this is what they could do, this is what they thought we can do, and they managed to do it. And I think you can say that about any film that's a bit older. I know a lot of people say that about Roger Moore's later years with a lot of back projection, but you could say about Dr. No, but I'm like, it's 60 years ago. So
Yeah.
you can't judge on today's style and equipment and how you do action sequences compared to how they did coming up to 30 years ago with GoldenEye.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes me feel so very old, I must admit, when I realize it's that long ago. And of course, the first time they used Leavesden, and that moment where he's been chucked out the plane with the pilot essentially, stuntman Paul Herbert, going out of the plane, the two of them together, grabs the bike and then sails off towards the edge of the cliff. Now that's Eddie Kidd on the motorcycle riding away, and he's riding towards cardboard mountains. If you look in the distance there, the set, or very similar to the cardboard planes that they had, which were the MiGs. When the lads are running towards the pilots of their cardboard cutouts, but nevertheless, it's just a really simple way of going, oh yeah, that's planes there. Oh look, there's mountains in the distance. I mean, I wasn't even aware of it until you look at it much later and go, oh yeah, the cardboard. That's interesting. But that's the old runway, and that runway now, of course, is the Harry Potter experience right on top of that. So next time you're walking in that neck of the woods. I think, in point of fact, that particular road, the runway, is the houses where Harry was living under the stairs.
Privet Drive.
That's it. You can tell that I'm a big fan of the. But although, having said that, I was on the first picture. I was on the set of the first picture, and having to walk around the place was magnificent. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I sat in the living room after they'd filmed, but I sat in the living room, and there's all the letters everywhere as they come down the chimney. It was just so real, and each one of them had a name on it and an address. It was all very clever, and there was something in the envelopes as well, very detailed. Right, so GoldenEye making its appearance at number 5. Number 4, what's happening at number 4?
We're going another Martin Campbell. We're going Casino Royale. We're going for the African Rundown.
Yeah.
And part of this, there is a little bit of bias because I was very fortunate to be on the Spy Hard podcast a while ago, and I managed to speak to Sebastian Foucan.
Yeah.
And to just hear such positivity about his experience and such love for his role and his time working on a Bond picture was obviously a joy to hear. But this was the first film that I saw. This was the first Bond film that I saw at the cinema. So
was it really?
Yeah. So right out of the gate, you get a sequence like this, which is so much more,
puts the benchmark very high, doesn't it?
Very much so. And you have all this experience of, I'd watched all the previous Bond films up until this point on video, or by that point DVD as well. So to get such I don't know, such a well-paced sequence that just flows and was so impressive, and see kind of the brutality, the realness, and the actual reality of what a modern chase could be. And I guess in some ways, in a lot of ways, actually kind of a post 9/11 Bond, what does this new reality look like? we know Die Another Day was 2002, but this really felt like a reset. Of course, it was, and to have this chase was just marvelous and was so unexpected. I know free running at the time, it was a really popular thing that was really starting to hit popularity, and then you get it as part of a Bond film. And to me, that's kind of a match made in heaven a little bit for something like this. You get a brand new 00 agent chasing this guy who can pretty much run and jump anywhere. And we got this massive crane causing, endless amounts of destruction. um, and yet it flies by again. And David Arnold has a fantastic piece of music that's going, underneath this.
Mm.
And you can feel the weight of everything. Every hit, you feel like you want to hold your ribs a little bit when Bond hits, jumps from one and hits the other crane. It's just a fantastic sequence. I'm so glad that we got something like this. I think everything in Casino Royale, I was very close to putting the stairwell sequence.
Oh, that's another brilliant fight. Yeah.
But I think with this, just the visuals alone, is just something that will stick with me in that first experience of watching this. I think it's just one of those things that makes it hit.
Bond up until that point, I mean, this is the whole purpose of this exercise and this podcast and YouTube show and this fascination with the action and stunts, is that whenever you see the trailer of a movie, right, even if it's crap, you see 1 minute 30 of the most exciting moments from that picture, and it always contains the stunts in some shape or form, an action sequence. Everything leading up to this had been amazing. We've seen it all. It's all been done. And then you see a sequence that's never been done, by an individual who invented the sport. Sebastian Fourcat invented free running. Gary Powell, who became stunt coordinator on this picture, was very familiar with a show that he watched, which I'm sure many of us watched at the time, on Channel 4 called Jump London. And Jump London was a vehicle for Sebastian Fourcat and 5 or 6 other guys to go to various landmarks around London and free run from point A to point B over there, and the fastest way to get from here to there. And what they were doing was revolutionary. And you then start to see later on down the line that this particular sequence has had such an impression on storytellers, on writers, on directors, on actors, on producers. They all want a slice of the free running pie. To get from here to there, well, he often go through that door and then go over there and do that. Well, we're just going to go through this thing in a straight line as the crow flies. That's what we're going to do. There's a wonderful, there's so many wonderful moments in it. There's a couple of moments which are brilliant. I think really spectacular. He goes down the lift shaft. Do you remember the lift shaft, the empty lift shaft? He jumps from one side, he leaves the gap here to there and pushes himself into the landing of the other one. Breathtaking, really is. And the other one is the leap from one side onto the roof of the other scissor lift going down, or the lift balance going up, and then landing onto the other side. One leap, no wire, straight to the other, possibly a safety wire taken out afterwards, but majority of it done for real, and you go, that's absolutely spectacular. You then have Kai Martin, who did a lot of the free running sequence for Daniel Craig, and you can tell the different running styles. So Kai Martin has a particular running style, and he's the one that runs, slides, and then disappears down the hole. And again, you go, Jesus, that was how well timed was that? But you see the difference in character, because, as you said yourself, much more brutal, much more action involved. Sebastian Fourcat goes to leave the building by leaping up and going through the little skylight at the top of the doorway and down the other side. And Daniel Craig just goes bang and comes straight through it and stands there and says, boom, and off he goes again. That's Roger would have gone out the door or would have done, they'd have been all sorts of quips and bits and pieces. No, he doesn't do that. He goes crashing through that wall like a bull in a china shop because, all of a sudden he's a 00 now, and there's a slightly different, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But yeah, Martin Campbell, again, doing what Martin Campbell does. And I don't think, and I'm not taking anything away from anybody else who's been on, and I know that a great many of those individuals who will have coordinated the action on Bond over the years will say same thing. But I'm not sure that you would have had the same level of action on Casino if it hadn't have been Gary Powell in charge. The concept of him being involved was an absolute keystroke to getting everything right, and subsequently on those remaining pictures, and of course, Lee Morrison taking over for No Time to Die, so because was Gary's right hand man pretty much through all of those. So I think a crucial moment, but an amazing sequence. And you talk about David Arnold's music there to be given. He's the guy who's been composing all the Bond movies up to this point. Oh, you can't use the Bond theme. What? Because that's his safety net, isn't it? He says himself in all the interviews, when Bond does something Bond, you play the Bond theme. Well, you're not allowed to play the Bond theme yet and doing what he did, and as you say, the African rundown score and every other cue in that picture is magnificent, leading up to that moment at the end where he can suddenly go, okay, here it comes. Yeah, it's brilliant. Breathtaking moment.
Yeah, and it's just another one of those times where you can feel how much effort's been put into it. And of course, every person who works on any film like this is going to put energies and effort into it. Yeah. But this is a franchise that's come back after a little break, that needs to feel reinvigorated, needs to have a different direction. And that everyone is feeling that. They want to make this as groundbreaking and as exciting as possible. And you see that with different franchises if they do have a break or whatever else. We'd start with GoldenEye anyway, how they opened that. So they needed this, especially after a pre-title sequence, which is a lot more smaller scale, but still exciting in what it's trying to do. They don't need to do the stunt there because they're going to do the title sequence, then have this big, massive action sequence and stunt coming up. So it's just things where they've twisted it a little bit to make it work what they need. And we saw, you talk about the trailer, this sequence was all over the place. It was one of the key things that, you've not seen Bond like this.
Yeah, and we sold the movie, didn't it?
Absolutely, 100%.
And nice that they've reused an old location as well, because it was one of the places from Thunderball, wasn't it?
Yeah, was it Thunderball? I thought it was not The Spy Who Loved Me.
No, it was so where the pool sequence in Thunderball where Bond and Domino are having clam chowder. If you look in the background, you see this constructed building, which evidently was under construction or has been under construction for some time. And then they used it again in Spy Who Loved Me for camera positions. I seem to remember that long shot looking at the submarines, or the miniature submarines in this instance. So to go back and go, right, look, this building looks like it's been constructed. Let's put cranes and scaffolding on it. It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. What a super job.
It's clever. I do love when locations can be reused in a different way.
Yeah.
In a multitude of ways. So
no, absolutely first class. Okay, we're in the top 3. Where do you go for number 3?
We're only going a few years back before Casino Royale. We're going to The World Is Not Enough, and I'm saying the Thames Chase.
Oh, okay.
The World Is Not Enough is one of my favorites. I definitely think it's underrated. Along with You Only Live Twice, I think nowadays it's definitely underrated. I love The World Is Not Enough for what it attempts to do, and I think in this I'm so glad that this is in the pre-title sequence. I think this is exactly what you need to really get the film going before the title sequence, to really get the vibe of something's going on here. This is somewhat standard, but really if you've just had an attack on home soil, an explosion at MI6, then very easily it just transfers into a boat chase, which I think if you came into this blind, you would not think, oh yeah, there's going to be a boat chase in the Thames. It's again another thing that's not very you wouldn't expect it until you see that boat there, and it's like, wait a minute. And then you have this marvelous chase, and I know it's been said before that, the actual geographically it doesn't really make sense,
Yeah.
but
But the Americans don't know that.
no, and you ignore it anyway because the action is amazing. And
Yeah.
speaking of David Arnold and his music, to hear this piece being
Oh,
played at the Royal
brilliant.
Albert Hall gave me, I could have actually cried purely for the fact that I think it's such an underrated piece of music.
Mm.
And it's so very 1999. It feels like that era. And so that underscoring this entire sequence is just, it feels very British to me. And not that I'm the biggest patriot in the world, but there's something to be said about having a chase in London in the Thames whilst this fantastic piece of Bond music is being played. And then it ends with, the Millennium Dome, which is again such an identifier of that time period.
Mm.
It being brand new and then having a hot air balloon, massive explosion there. It just culminates in an amazing way. And of course, the Q-boat in itself is just, I think, a really gorgeous looking gadget. The little tie thing underneath the water,
Naturally, yeah.
the flip. It does everything. It goes on land for a bit. I just have such fun with this. I think if anyone was unsure about watching the Lord's not enough, I'd say just watch this scene, and then you won't want to turn it off afterwards. You really won't, because I just think, yeah, it's fantastic.
The I think the World Is Not Enough has moments in it which I like enormously. I'm not overly fussed about the Electra King character as such per se, but the to have, so the original pre-title sequence was him coming out of the window with the suitcase, and then that was it, right? And they realized, that's not very exciting, is it? That's really not going to work. So the concept of having this guided tour of London, care of 007, and as Vic Armstrong said himself, the most complicated thing was getting the House of Parliament down one side, because they weren't allowed to. They had to spend. Jack Straw, I think, was Home Secretary at the time, and he was the one that said, "Oh, I'll sort it." Nobody else wanted to touch it with a barge pole. You can't film out there. What happens if there's people in the lobby and all that sort of bits and pieces? No, Jack Straw, it's a good idea, and he could see the potential of it for similarly with Skyfall, I suppose, that whole thing of the anniversary year. So yeah, a very exciting chase. Never mind geographically, it's not important. What is important is that there are key factors along the way which make it incredible. You are introduced to a man called Wade Eastwood, who was predominantly the Brosnan double in the chase up and down the Thames, and coming in behind the Sunseeker and in the wake of the boat as the Houses of Parliament are going by, and firing over going into the boathouse. That's him as well. And he, of course, Wade Eastwood, is the guy responsible for doing all of the action on the Tom Cruise Mission Impossible pictures. So, they've done about 12, 15 pictures together, I think, now. And he's wherever Tom goes, Wade goes too. But that was more or less the first kind of time we saw it. And then Gary Powell, of course, does the barrel roll, which they tested originally on a place called Hawley Lake in Surrey, and were doing it on dry land. They were doing it from the water up a ramp and trying to flip it over and land in boxes just to see if it would go. And they were having some difficulty with it. So they brought in, or Vic, of course, brought in his old pal Dave Bickers, the stunt engineer, who many moons ago, I mean, he was a motorcycle world champion, a trial bikes motorcycle world champion. And he was one of the guys that was driving the tuk-tuk in Octopussy, doubling for VJ. So Vic says to him, how can we get this thing we want to try and get it to barrel roll over. He said, right, leave it with me. And about 15, 20 minutes later, it comes back. He said, well, I can put a piston here and a piston there, fire them independently. And you go one, and it spins round. And then they hung it. And Gary was just, you take the controls. And he was given this little key thing to go, right, fire, fire. Oh, I see what it's doing. It's doing this. And then they put that into the controls. And Gary says when he hit the ramp, push the button, and the whole thing just went over in one foul swoop. And when he landed, the steering disappeared and he fired himself into the wall. But apart from that, they did it. And it was magnificent. It was absolutely magnificent to see it done again, you know? And, you know, you got that huge boat traveling at speed, because a great many of the boats that travel up and down the Thames, they're not going at a fair rate of knots, but these were, particularly a huge Sunseeker like that. And there was a young lady brought in called Sarah Donahue, who again was a world champion powerboat racer, and she could throw this thing around on a sixpence, as you can see when she's flinging it into side lanes. So bringing all this together and creating that sequence and ticking certain boxes along the way. Right, big explosion. Yep, done that. Lovely. Jump. Yep, done that. On dry land. How are we going to do that? Doesn't matter. It's going on dry land. Oh, okay, fine. So all of those little bits and pieces crashing through the restaurant and coming out the other side with the cheese straw. I used to like the cheese straw. Maybe picks that up. And then all of a sudden it's the opening sequence of EastEnders all over again as they're going down towards the Millennium. Brilliant. Also, I was very interested to find out how many people, particularly tourists from the rest of the world, had no idea that the Millennium Dome and the O2 were the same place.
It took a while for me to figure out, I'm not going to lie.
Building, it's the O2. What, the Millennium Dome? Yeah. Ooh, why was it called the Millennium Dome? Well, long story, but no, it's a brilliant sequence. And is it still the longest? Oh, no, it's No Time to Die longer.
No Time to Die is the longest, but yeah, I think The World Is Not Enough is probably
19 minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah, but and I think a lot of people, at least when I was younger, had more of an issue with that, because the idea of the pre-title sequence being that long, I think, seemed really alien. But I mean, you go from GoldenEye's pre-title to Tomorrow Never Dies to The World Is Not Enough. Had it ended with him walking off with the suitcase,
yeah, exactly.
There was a deleted scene with Renard and the cigar girl.
That's right. Yeah, because
out, and I don't know whether that would have made it. Helped it or not, but I think in any case it was the right decision to put the sequence there.
I think so. Yeah.
I just feel like it would have drawn out the film a bit too much if it was done after the pre-titles.
Yeah,
if it was
absolutely.
done after the titles, I mean. So yeah, I do think it was the correct choice. I know I've seen the extended version where there's all those unused shots of that sequence. You know, again, it's another one where I can't even imagine having to work on that sequence, because I know there's so much stuff going on. And you're in such a location like that. It's not like you're doing it on a soundstage or in a remote location.
You get it for short bursts as well. You have to use it. Right, you've got an hour. Okay, what can we do in an hour? Well, we've got to do this sequence. Right, let's get it done. You've got 2 hours now. We built this. You know, they built that additional. I'm just trying to think where it was. It's where the Sunseeker comes around and crashes through it. There's that big glass building. Like a raft on the water. So that all had to be built from scratch to then get knocked down again. So that had to be done very quickly, and then clear everything away so they could open the waterway to the public again. So all of this sort of stuff, got to do it in short bursts. But getting it done. But and there have been occasions where I've just watched the pre-title sequence and then thought, yep, that'll do me for now. Because it's brilliant. I love it. I really do. The pace of the whole thing is magnificent. Everything from him going, "King, the money," all that sort of stuff, and then the rest of it. Fantastic. Absolutely love it. And for me, that's fairly highbrow stuff, and it's at number 3. So God only knows what you're going to have now as your top 2. What's it, number 2?
Number 2 is maybe my second favorite just stunt in Bond.
Okay.
And it's the Moonraker pre-title sequence.
My word.
That sequence, I think when I first saw it, again, I was probably about 10 or 11. I was so kind of gobsmacked that even then I was like, what the hell is going on? Because I didn't know anything about Moonraker at that point, really, apart from that, we were going to space. So to have this fight on an aircraft, it feels very Goldfinger, whatever's going on. Suddenly Bond's pushed out by Jaws, no less, with no parachute on. Again, it's one of those where, I know you have to do so many jumps. There's so much going on. There's so much work to go into this, 3 minutes perhaps.
That's it. Yeah.
So much time and effort. But I think the final product, it sells it. And I think as much as I love The Spy Who Loved Me's, ski jump, and I I think everyone has to. It's such a remarkable, stunt. I personally prefer this just because I just think it's magnificent in every sense of the word. And of course, we can see that, they've got parachutes underneath that clothes. Of course, it needs to happen for safety, but just getting into the mindset that Bond has no parachute on and he's got to chase someone who's got one, just to, otherwise he's dead. Literally, that's the only option. There's nothing else he can do. And that concept alone brings the sequence to life. And
Mm.
then there's what we can actually see, and it's so real.
Yeah.
I have a great fondness for it. And I think it would be silly to overlook this, no matter what people think about Moonraker. I think, the action
Can't
is,
disagree with you there. Absolutely.
yeah.
And again, there are certain moments and certain times in cinema, and this is absolutely one of those moments. This had never been done before, right? You had parachute jobs before, you'd had skydiving done before, but you had never had hidden parachutes, and that's absolutely crucial to the way the scene works. So yeah, there is a moment where you see the parachute underneath Jake Lombard's jacket, right? But that's because they tried to configure a way of being able to conceal it, as they kept referring to it, under the wardrobe. So deploying the wardrobe, getting rid of the wardrobe so they can get the parachute up. Up the back of Jake Lombard's jacket is effectively, I think in those early test jumps they were doing, they had the seam down the middle was removed and it was lightly stitched together so that when the parachute deployed, it opened the jacket. It wasn't attached to either end. The jacket opened. Later on, it then had a little Velcro tapping down the back of it, and then would just simply fall apart. But these are it's bear in mind it's very difficult when you leap out of an airplane knowing that you have a perfectly serviceable parachute on your back that works, right? Because you've packed it yourself. And that's the key to, very rarely will you find any skydiver or anybody who's prepared to do a parachute jump, particularly if they've got it on their back or it's a free fall scenario. They very rarely allow anybody else to pack it unless they are there with them, because it is their own. The life is in their hands, right? They pack it in a certain way. It must be packed and folded in a certain way for easy deployment. So you do all of that, and then you put a costume over the top of it, right? And the costume, so it has to be slightly larger, but it's brought in certain areas. So it's slightly tighter around the wrists because that's going to stay put. You don't want the whole thing billowing up and causing difficulty when the chute's been deployed, because then you'll have difficulty controlling it when you're trying to bring it down again. And then you've got to find a skydiver who's big enough to be able to double jaws, because the character's 7'2". Well, skydivers aren't normally that big. They very rarely do you find a great big basketball player who goes, I really think that I could do a bit of skydiving. So they found a guy, but he was 6'4", 6'5". Ronnie Luganbill was the guy's name. And you look at his positioning, it's when his positioning, he has his wrists bent at the end, giving it that sort of menacing thing, and that's what he was going for. He'd also got tinfoil in his mouth, which was driving him nuts, apparently. But then when you realize that, of course, the parachute that they're fighting over is empty because they both have their own. So there's a lot to take in. But it revolutionized the way that action cinema is done. It revolutionized the way that skydiving is done in movies. And then from that moment on, whenever you see these guys, because these guys, they cornered the market. BJ and Jake Lombard and Jake Brake and Randy DeLuca, who's the camera guy. He's got a huge camera on his head. Now his parachute has to open even slower than everybody else's, because if his opens really quickly, his head gets snapped back. He might break his neck because he's got all this weight on. So there's all this stuff going on. Very, very complicated. But look at that final sequence. Absolutely breathtaking. It really is. And it's understandable why it's up there.
What adds to everything, anything that you talk about like this, is that, you have an admiration for the scene anyway, the sequence. And then when you find out more about the behind the scenes and how things are put together, and whether or not it was a brand new thing or they were trying something new or
Mm,
different, it adds to it because you get a further appreciation for it. And a lot of it is not just, of course, the main thing is the actual things that are going on within the camera, what we
mm,
can see, but it's also what's happening afterwards. And
yeah.
one of my favorite parts of the sequence is where Bond is fighting for that parachute, and it goes dun, 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 and then there's no music. You just
Stops.
hear the air. You just hear the air, and they're just fighting over it. Um, and it's just clever bits of editing that just add to it. Like that's the point where I get goosebumps. If I don't already have them, that's where my hair stands on end because it's
Mm.
like you again, it's the tension that's building up. What is going to happen? Is Bond going to be able to do it? And then is he then going to be able to put it back on? And suddenly Jaws comes after him, and it's just like, what is
Yeah.
going on?
Just when you thought it was okay, then it's this guy.
And he joins the
Um,
circus.
the
Yeah,
circus.
it's it's one if it wasn't for my top stunt, which is not number one, but is the thing that I'm going to talk about after that just briefly. I think it's one of the most impressive sequences done in Bond, regardless of whether or not it's action or whatever. I just think it's spectacular.
It's a very influential sequence on also a number of other levels. For me, and I know that Philip Latchford will understand this, being the world's biggest Moonraker fan, I think it's safe to say. But again, it was the first time that I looked at a man in a blazer and thought, I could wear that. A roll neck sweater, I could do that. Grey slacks, not a problem. I can do that. Because that's what Roger did. Roger made wearing conventional bits and pieces. Michael Caine used to always say that, he had a blazer for 40, 50 years. And he said, in a 40, 50-year period, it'll be in fashion at least 3 times. So you're just going to keep using it.
True.
But you just wear different things with it. The two of them, Roger wearing that looks phenomenal. He looks really, really good. And I think that had a lot to do with it, and the whole look of the whole sequence and the music of the sequence and the way it was shot, and the clever way that Michael Wilson threw himself into the whole thing and said, I've got this. He found this camera, this Panaflex lens, which revolutionized the way in which they started filming. So he's also responsible for that. So, yeah, absolutely well deserved. We'll run through these. So this is Sam's top 9. Bond versus Oddjob in at 10. Afghan Freedom Fight from the Living Daylights at number 9. Drive in the Country from For Your Eyes Only at number 8. The Cuba Fight from No Time to Die at 7. Little Nelly versus Everybody Else in You Only Live Twice at 6. The GoldenEye pre-title sequence Plane Chase is at number 5. African Rundown from Casino Royale, the free-running sequence at 4. The Thames Chase from The World Is Not Enough at number 3, and the groundbreaking skydive sequence at the start of Moonraker is his number 2. What makes up your 10? What is the number 1 on your list?
It's very top of the pops, isn't it? What is number 1 this week? For
Up
me,
2, down 4.
Yeah. Exactly. This is not anyone who knows me, it's not going to be surprised that it's from this film, but it is from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and it is the attack on Piz Gloria. As an overall sequence, I just think it's perfection from beginning to end. As I said before about when we were talking about the Little Nelly sequence, we had the build up, the lead up to the action. With this particular sequence, the build up is, the over and out music. You have this gorgeous sunrise that's happening with the helicopters on the horizon. You get Blofeld's interactions with Tracy, her figuring out that Bond and Draco is like on their way, and then she starts to play him. And that this whole build up, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose and there's a massive attack at the top of this mountain. And it's one of those where we've had attacks like Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, where you've got all these people attacking in various different places. Fantastic. There's something about these two groups fighting against each other on top of the mountain in snow and ice. All that's going on outside, these massive explosions, whilst Tracy is single-handedly fighting off people inside, which is, Tracy's my favorite Bond girl. I adore Diana Riggs, so to just have that alone without everything going out and outside is very impressive to me.
Mm.
Because I don't think we've really had a female character do that before in such a way. So that's going on. You get that excellent shot of Lazenby sliding across with the gun, and that silhouette of him just prior against the sunlight is again perfect. And it's a nice kind of farewell to the original classic Bond theme before it changes, for good. I again just think that the location itself is one I hope to God I can get to one day. But it's very difficult to describe because I look at it and I go, there's nothing wrong with it. Even with some weird editing things like Guns Make Me Very Nervous being just added in for good measure towards it, and then the scientist throwing whatever it is, that chemical, whatever, into the glass door and Lazenby looking at it, and then when it cuts to the long shot, it's gone. The hole's gone. Little things like that. I don't care. You get all that's happening, then a shootout. You get the miniature Piers Gloria exploding at the end. Everything about that sequence is just it gives me extra years of my life watching that.
Is it your favorite Bond?
That film is my favorite, but no question, and has been for many years now. That's first and Moonraker's second, funnily enough, actually.
Right. There's a juxtaposition right there.
Very much so. Yeah.
Is it the location that works for this? Because the action itself is full on. If that was somewhere else, if that location wasn't Piz Gloria, would it still have the desired effect, do you think?
Potentially, maybe not. I think because we've been to that location a few times and we've not seen an attack, most of the time we've been in this location, it's been surrounded with the Angels of Death. It's had this whole different kind of you don't look at it and go, this is like a battle arena, per se. This is all about a location of where things are happening. Everything else is happening off screen. Maybe you would expect something like the ski sequences to be the main action sequences from this location, but the fact that there's so many people up there, that there's this firefight happening, that there's flamethrowers being used, and that ultimately it gets explosives all through it, and that it gets destroyed. I think that definitely works in its favor, 1,000%.
I've often thought that you take Piz Gloria out, you take Muren, that whole area, out of the equation, and maybe it wouldn't work if you had that in I don't know, if you had that in California, let's say, or you had that in Germany, but in the summertime, like the Eagle's Nest type thing, Hitler's outpost. Would it be more of like a Where Eagles Dare in the summer as opposed to an On Her Majesty's Secret Service in the winter? It's interesting that the action itself, not a million miles away from each other. If you compare Where Eagles Dare and which happened the year before, and On Her Majesty's, the premise is the same thing. They're still storming the building. They're still trying to get stuff out in bits and pieces. The issue in this instance is they want to blow that up, and they want to get Tracy out. And her father's in on the job as well, and so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's interesting how that location triggered lots of ideas, because they created a whole bunch of ideas that they wanted to do, and then when they got to the location, they realized, well, I can't really do that, but look, this might work. We could do this, and so you suddenly start feeding off what the natural location gives you. And I think a lot of that car chase and a lot of the bits and pieces leading up to that, and the ski chase and the areas of where they can and can't go, and what they were then able to do with over the cliff and all that sort of bits and pieces and stuff like that. It's an interesting, the flamethrower guy, whose idea was, everybody else has got machine guns, and he's going, the hell am I supposed to do with this? You know, melt the snow? I mean, no, you're gonna set fire to some poor bloke up a back staircase is what you're going to do with that. Blimey. It's all the tricky jobs, but visually it looks great as well because it's the white of the snow and the outfits, and then it's the different boiler suits against the different boiler suits, all that sort of stuff. I love all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, when you were just talking about the location, if you pictured this attack happening in For Your Eyes Only at the climax of that, I think similar vibes, but perhaps if it were without the snow and without kind of this whole backdrop of Piz Gloria that we've seen throughout the film, that's now culminating here, it may not have had the same effect. But, this was the first Bond film where snow was, really featured in that kind of climate. So that generates ideas, and I could totally believe that they may have thought of stuff there and gone, we can't use that. Maybe we'll pocket that for later, and perhaps something like what happened in Spy Who Loved Me, I'm just like, or in For Your Eyes Only, or whatever else. You take bits of, well, when we were at this location, we thought perhaps we could have done this. We didn't. It wasn't in the script. We did a recce, didn't work out. Perhaps we can use it in this. So. I think it set a trend of where Bond could go a little bit more. It's not just somewhere, traditionally exotic for Bond. It's somewhere, it's a bit more isolated.
Yes.
But nevertheless fits the theme of what we're trying to put across, and obviously from the book as well. It fits it as best as they can. I'm glad. So it makes me glad that they held off on creating this film, because they couldn't find the right location earlier on, or it wasn't the right season, or whatever it was. Some things it's just the right timing. So
and certainly, I think I did mention this before when somebody mentioned it in their list. Is that the spontaneity is, even though these action sequences have to be worked out to the last detail for safety and for various other bits and pieces, and bearing in mind the location that you're working in, there are still moments of spontaneity. Nosha Powell, one of the stunt guys, is in the chopper and decides at the last moment to dive into the snowdrift from the chopper. Everybody else has jumped out, but Nosha's gone, looks deep enough for me to dive into it, and it'll look great. So he's had that moment. He's gone, bugger it, hey, and gone out.
There's coverage. So
there's coverage. It's fine. If they don't get me, they'll get somebody else. But I reckon I can do this. And it's always that moment you see people. Yeah, he's jumping out. He's jumping out. Jesus, where's that guy going?
He's sliding down the mountain at this point.
Yeah, wonderful moment. Go right. I'm going. So yeah, rightly deserved. At the top of the tree on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the Piz Gloria attack brings your 10 to a close. But there is a bonus, because I did ask to select a non-Bond, or you might have a Bond +1 and a non-Bond possibly. So balls in your court. Go on ahead.
I do. I'll do. So for me, I didn't include this in the list because a lot of what I put on the list were sequences rather than moments. And this moment, I gave you a clue to what it was. And it is this. It is the AMC Hornet corkscrew, which for me, bear in mind, The Man with the Golden Gun was one of the only Bond films that I owned when I was very young. So it's one of the few that I saw before I saw the rest of them. And the chase itself, I like anyway, but that corkscrew moment to me as a kid was one of the most exciting things I could see.
Yep.
To me, nothing else. I didn't care about the whistle at all. In a film like The Man with the Golden Gun, a whistle over a jump is the least of its worries. But I love that. I love the film anyway because the themes are so conflicting. Like, it does not really have proper rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
Which is why I think the whistle works more than it doesn't. I probably am that person who goes, you know what, I would rather it with the whistle because I've seen edits without it. And to me, it just doesn't hit as much. But the stunt itself, and we know, it was, the computer that helps, work it out so that they could do it, the actual shot of seeing it happen. To me, it's one of the greatest stunts ever made. And I used to watch that VHS trailer where they do the Bond collection, and every time that stunt was done, it would make me go, oh, I actually want to put on the Golden Gun just to get to that bit. And
Yeah.
also as a kid, I loved J.W. Pepper as well. So it was a bit like, well, he's funny, not really understanding what he's saying, but going, he annoys Bond, so let's put that on.
Wasn't he in the
Um,
last one? Yeah, okay.
yeah, I did actually. Funny thing. One of my friends has just started watching all the Bonds with his flatmates, and he sent me this message. He's like, "Right, I've got to ask you a question." I was like, "Go ahead." He was like, "What is with J.W. Pepper being in these films?" I was like, "Right, he's only in those two, but I'm so glad that you've brought him up. I don't think he disliked me. He was just like, why did this happen?" And I'm like, this era of Bond was trying to find its feet again. They're trying some things.
People would write to the producers and go, "We like this guy. Can we have him back?" And they go, "Yeah, go on then. Why not?" That's not how it works anymore.
Absolutely not.
Um,
Um,
it is.
yeah.
It's a magnificent moment. It is a magnificent moment. The problem I have with it, and I'm not disputing it at all, it is absolutely beautiful from start to finish, but it's too perfect. It is too perfect. It's filmed in such a way that it doesn't allow for the what if factor. And that crucially would be what I'd like to see. I would like to see Bond sliding to a stop and Pepper going, "The bridge is that way." And you're not thinking, "Oh, sure am." And off he goes. And he does the thing. And then right behind him is a police car that doesn't make it and ends up in the drink. Or there's a family having a wash in the corner or whatever it is, because that's what they used the clongs for in those days, and they ended up, they're thrown over and there's just something else going on. The moment in Octopussy where the car is fired off the top of the train, and there's the bloke in the fishing boat, and the car lands in the water and chucks the boat that way because it's hit the back of the boat. That something like that, it's just too perfect. It's as absolutely it does exactly what it says on the tin. They worked it out in computer. This is what's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen. The only difference with all of that is that the bloke who's driving it has never driven the car before. And not only that, but he's lying down. So, for balance purposes, they've had to redesign the car and put the steering wheel in the middle and put it here and extend that and take everything else out. And he's lying down in the car. And he's never, ever, ever done this, tested it, done anything with it whatsoever. And now on action, he's got to give it the beans, get to 47.5 miles an hour and do the perfect thing. And it is absolutely perfect. You see the reaction. There's another camera angle of, I think, somebody filming it for their own posterity. And you see the approach, and then you see the take on that. And then as it pans across, you see everybody on the other side going, yes! They can't believe that it's as perfect as it really is. But it is only in a Bond movie could this happen. In fact, I spoke with a guy not that long ago on another podcast who has created this. He was driving for Hot Wheels. Hot Wheels had created a loop the loop thing, right? So a similar sort of barrel roll thing. But bear in mind the difference in the cars. The AMC Hornet was a production model, right? Had to be adjusted slightly. It had got, for 1974, it had got some oomph. It had got a fair old engine in it, and they'd worked out that it was capable of making the jump, did the whole thing. But obviously the car that is being used in the Hot Wheels thing, this is 2007, 2008, maybe a bit later, but it's a proper, serious, buggy type thing. And Hot Wheels, of course, have created a huge ramp thing and takeoff stuff. And he said himself, it's a nightmare to control. Everything about it, and the landing was horrible, and it was, they tried recreating it on Top Gear. It's the impossibilities of trying to do it. And so all of that, take that into consideration. And to do what they did and get it take one, and that was it. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I wish there needed to be something else. Cubby Broccoli said the same thing. He said it's brilliant, but it's just too perfect. And Harry Saltzman was just keen about having the elephant stampede. He didn't care about anything else.
I feel like because Pepper's in the car, maybe they thought that was enough. But if he wasn't there, then I would understand perhaps if there was. It's not like in A View to a Kill where the fire engine goes across the bridge, then the police cars try to do the same
Yeah, yeah,
thing,
yeah,
but
yeah.
then they get stuck. You know, you would imagine something like that would happen, or in A Spy Who Loved Me or Moonraker, where people would be watching and go, "What?" There's no other reaction. There's no reaction from anyone outside of the car. And I think maybe
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what was
Yeah.
needed. You only get Pepper's reaction. He's in it, so
If
he's done
If
it.
JD if he'd fallen out of the car whilst it was going through the air and disappeared into the water below, maybe that would have been something.
Perhaps.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and I've never seen it done. Well, the only other time we've ever seen it done was in The World Is Not Enough, when it did happen in the water.
Hmm.
You know, but on land, it's spectacular, absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
But yes, well done. So what's the non-Bond then?
Okay.
Are you having a crisis over this?
I'm not. I'm not anymore. And there is a specific part of this, but I think the whole sinking sequence in Titanic, anyway, just in terms of like the stunts that are done in there,
Okay.
if I was gonna do a particular focus on one element of that, I would think, do you know when the grand staircase is about to explode and the water is rising and it feels like it suddenly feels this large expanded area suddenly feels very compact. You've got
Yeah.
all these stunt performers in the water, so much camera equipment and safety things going on. I've watched the behind the scenes so many times, and then you get this massive explosion of water through the dome and this rise, and they're so careful in the timing of this, making sure that they get the cameras right,
Mm.
and making sure that they say cut 3 times to make sure that everyone knows. And I think for me, that's just one of so many stunts and action sequences within those final sections of the movie where you feel it because it's so real. Whereas nowadays, I can't imagine anything like that would be done in the way it's done. I feel like the late 90s, especially, has a great balance of still mostly using practical, but using CGI to kind of help support that rather than CGI being the focus and the practicals perhaps being used sparingly. Um, so that's where my mind goes to the most, because when I think of behind the scenes and stunt work, a lot I would, if I'm not thinking about Bond, I would go to that in particular.
I would say that if a similar sequence or of that nature was to be created today, you would have maybe sections which would be created. A great deal of it would have been done in motion capture, or a great deal of it would have been done with green screen. To have and build a tank in Mexico, as they did, and build pretty much a full-size half of the ship, and have it on hydraulics, allowing it to go up to a certain point and down to a certain point, and employ that many people to be on it at any one time, was a remarkable feat of engineering. I also don't think that any other director could have pulled it off.
No,
I think
absolutely.
Cameron was possibly the only person to get away with that, and to present that to an engineering team and go, "This is what I want," for them to go, "Right, fair enough, let's crack on," instead of going, "You're your fucking mind. Really? How on earth do you expect us to create that?" But it's a wonderful sequence. Rocky Taylor worked extensively on it. Of course, he's in the picture. He's very proud of having the first line in the movie, which is, "That's a big boat, isn't it, darling?" For the little girl who can go, "That's not a boat, Daddy, that's a ship." Oh, I see. The flooding sequences, the tank sequences, and the amount of training that everybody had to go through to be au fait with being in that depth of water, not deep water, but deep enough for not to put your feet on the floor, right? And anybody who has swum in any swimming pools, for instance, not so much here in the UK. There are some now, but particularly abroad, where the level of the floor remains the same and then disappears. We don't get a lot. Often we have it gets deeper and deeper, and it slides away. It slopes away, exactly.
Gradually.
Whereas there's ones in abroad that they just disappear, And the difference between having the confidence to be in one depth and having the confidence to be in another depth it's a psychological thing, and you have to understand your own breathing and be happy with people approaching you with a the word that's the word, yes. So you can do that. People like Gary Powell, for instance, there weren't that many people. There were enough people with British and American stunt people who were jumping from the boat. Gary told me that he was going through a whole series of costume changes, and so you get in the costume, you'd then jump into the water, you'd then get out of the water, quick costume change, go back, and then jump off again, right? And this was the whole rolling at the entire time. He gets on with his costume, and he sees Simon Crane, and Simon Crane says, "Where are you going?" He says, "I'm going down the shallow end." He says, "You're bloody not. You're coming up the deep end with me." He went, "Oh God!" So off he went. That 90 feet from its top point. I mean, that is some leap into water, and that's not a bottomless. That's a tank that's been created for the purpose of floating this thing. And again, wonderful cinematography, because on the basis of where it was built and the horizon of where it was built meant that when the water was up to its full level, it looked like it was on the remaining part of that ocean there, you see. But they created it in such a way that it had a natural wall around the outside which couldn't be seen from certain angles. It was very, very cleverly worked out. And Eunice, of course, was on the picture, and she was sliding down the hole. All this sort of stuff, having to adjust your position such that when you're vertical, you've only got one place to go, and there are people there who there were injuries, but there are people who also jumped from that boat probably 25, 30 times, over and over and over again, because it was exhilarating. So there's so much going on in that sequence. There are some terrific behind the scenes stuff at people who haven't seen that. If you have seen them, you'll be familiar with Titanic, but there are hours of really good stuff on YouTube as well, good quality stuff, which not only goes through the making of the picture, but particularly the making of that scene, that tank, that everything. And did you spot there's a back to front thing? They built it the wrong way around. I don't know whether anybody ever spotted that. So there are moments when there's guys who are wearing White Star insignia, but it's reversed. Because they were supposed to be filming it from the other side, so they had to flip it in frame. So it was all very confusing. There was a slight confusion there, but again, that's a Cameron thing. He wants absolute tiny detail and wants everything to the last. So the idea of building a set that big and doing it well, it's not impossible for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that this film is shot anyway, just everything, I think it's just very smart. And I think there's a lot of planning, so much planning behind the scenes. I mean, the fact that, like, as you said, the what they did build was only built on one side. So when they do the Southampton scenes, all the things that have writing on, whether it's the actual warehouses, it's all written back to front, so they can easily just flip it and it makes sense. Making sure that, everyone's aware of, right, you jump in the water, you hit your mark, and then you go out, you swim out the way so the next person can go. So it's more efficient like that. Having people on wires, that you have foam sections that people can land into, foam people that you can land into as well.
Yes, absolutely.
To make up the bodies. I just think for anyone who is interested, who hasn't seen those behind the scenes, it gives you such a sense of everything that's going on in the film, from those stunt pieces to the additional CGI that adds to those stunts and does the things that people can't do, which is fall from I don't know how many feet in the air, like over 100 feet.
That's the guy hitting the propeller.
One of the
Gary did the first part, and then they CG'd the bit as so that lots of extending the fall, all that sort of stuff, and making the water look really good. They're talking about Die Another Day being, we had so much trouble with the water, and the water was very complicated, and yet this is prior to Die Another Day. This is what, 97? Is it 97, 96?
96, 97,
and there was I think there's a piece on the making of where they've got the creating the wake of the ship, because it's the CG ship traveling through the water as the two of them are on the front of the thing doing the I Can Fly routine, And so that, but the creation of that is actually really very clever. And yet, if you compare it to the sort of Die Another Day thing, where they're creating huge quantities of water and ice and bits and pieces, you go, well, okay, but it doesn't really look as exciting as that, and that was done years before. So often, people trying too hard. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I feel like with something like Titanic, it's things are very, supplementary, and things, support each other. So it's like we use real water, then we use an existing wake from either a smaller ship, add that alongside with CGI elements that help, whereas creating a full, I don't know if it's a full CGI wave or not, on Die Another Day. I've never looked too deep into it.
I'd rather not discuss it if I was
I understand.
I'll break out in a cold sweat, you know what I'm like.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I saw it in the cinema actually, on IMAX last year, Titanic. And even though in some cases, looks a little bit dated and stuff, on the whole, it's still such an impressive feat for film. And I remember watching Poseidon when it came out in 2006. Or was it 2005? I can't remember. But I mean, in any case, you look at the difference between the way those two films are made, and it's night and day. And I would still prefer to watch the original Poseidon Adventure. I absolutely love the sequences in that. It's absolutely a fantastically, well-made film. Poseidon is to a point in what it's doing. But I think overall Titanic is, the absolute, the balance of, it's that line just before everything starts to get more CGI. I feel like it's one of those last hurrahs, something like an Independence Day, would get, which is also, I think, very similar. Lots of use of sets and miniatures with CGI, used there to support it. So yeah.
Well, Titanic has become your last hurrah in this particular list, and again, Sam, I must thank you for doing this. It's a great pleasure to see you on here again, and I know that the rest of the community will be thrilled that you've come up and put your list together. And if anybody else out there wants to have a go, take a leaf out of Sam's book and write a list, compile a list, and then we'll do it. We'll get together and we'll sort something out. But for now, Sam Rogers, thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
There we go. Lots of good stuff there. Another cracking top 10. If you think you can do better or he has missed something off, well, why don't you drop me a line? BehindTheStunts007@gmail.com is the email address. It's on screen as well, so you don't miss out. Or indeed, drop a comment down here if you want to have a go, and we'll get in touch and we'll sort something out for you. If you need to contact Sam, follow him on Twitter, follow him on Instagram. There's a YouTube address as well, and all of those details are in the notes down below, so don't forget to click on that too. Next week, we will do something completely different, but it will make up for a decent period here on Friday, because we like to give you the best that we possibly can. If you're not already doing so, go and subscribe. Go on. The button's on the screen there. It won't do you any harm. Lots of others do, Listen to the podcast on a Wednesday. The link for that is at the bottom. It's the Linktree link. Click that, and it's got all of the options for social media. So go and subscribe to the podcast, and then subscribe here to the YouTube channel, and we'll catch you again next week. Until then, it's bye for now.